Hi guys! So today we're back and we're going to be reading chapters 20 and 21 of Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Alright, chapter 20. In the square, as they came out, a suspended mass of gasoline exhaust cooked slowly in the July sun. It was a terrible thing. Unlike pure heat, it held no promise of rural escape, but suggested only roads choked with the same foul asthma. During their lunch outdoors, across from the Luxembourg Gardens, Rosemary had cramps and felt fretful and full of impatient lassitude. It was the forced taste of this that had inspired her self-accusation of selfishness in the station. Dick had no suspicion of the sharpness of the change. He was profoundly unhappy, and the subsequent increase of egotism tended momentarily to blind him to what was going on round about him, and deprive him of the long groundswell of imagination that he counted on for his judgments. After Mary North left them, accompanied by the Italian singing teacher who had just joined them for coffee and was taking her to her train, Rosemary too stood up, bound for an engagement at her studio. Meet some officials. And oh, she proposed, if Collis Clay, that southern boy, if he comes while you are still sitting here, just tell him I couldn't wait. Tell him to call me tomorrow. Too insouciant, in reaction from the late disturbance, she had assumed the privileges of a child, the result being to remind the Divers of their exclusive love for their own children. Rosemary was sharply rebuked in a short passage between the women. You'd better leave the message with the waiter. Nicole's voice was stern and unmodulated. We're leaving immediately. Rosemary got it, took it without resentment. I'll let it go then. Goodbye, you darlings. Dick asked for the check. The Divers relaxed, chewing tentatively on toothpicks. Well, they said together. He saw a flash of unhappiness on her mouth, so brief that only he would have noticed, and he could pretend not to have seen. What did Nicole think? Rosemary was one of a dozen people he had worked over in the past years. These had included a French circus clown, Abe and Mary North, a pair of dancers, a writer, a painter, a comedian from the Grand Guignol, a half-crazy pedalist from the Russian ballet, a promising tenor they had staked to a year in Milan. Nicole well knew how serious these people interpreted his interest and enthusiasm, but she realized also that, except while their children were being born, Dick had not spent a night apart from her since their marriage. On the other hand, there was a pleasantness about him that simply had to be used. Those who possessed these pleasantness had to keep their hands in and go along attaching people that they had no use to make off. Now Dick hardened himself and let a minute pass without making any gesture of confidence, any representation of constantly renewed surprise that they were one together. Collis Clay out of the south edged a passage between the closely packed tables and greeted the Divers cavalry. Such salutations always astonished Dick, acquaintances saying hi to them or speaking only to one of them. He felt so intensely about people that in moments of apathy he preferred to remain concealed. That one could parade a casualness into his presence was a challenge to the key on which he lived. Collis, unaware that he was without a wedding garment, heralded his arrival with, I reckon I'm late. The maid has flown. Dick had to wrench something out of himself before he could forgive him for not having first complimented Nicole. She left almost immediately, and he sat with Collis, finishing the last of his wine. He rather liked Collis. He was post-war, less difficult than most of the Southerners he had known at New Haven a decade previously. Dick listened with amusement to the conversation that accompanied the slow, profound stuffing of a pipe. In the early afternoon, children and nurses were trekking into the Luxembourg Gardens. It was the first time in months that Dick had let this part of the day out of his hands. Suddenly, his blood ran cold as he realized the content of Collis' confidential monologue. Sorry. She's not so cold as you'd probably think. I admit I thought she was cold for a long time, but she got into a jam with a friend of mine going from New York to Chicago at Easter. A boy named Hillis she thought was pretty nutsy at New Haven. She had a compartment with a cousin of mine, but she and Hillis wanted to be alone. So in the afternoon, my cousin came and played cards in our compartment. Well, after about 2 hours, we went back, and there was Rosemary and Bill Hillis standing in the vestibule arguing about the conductor. Rosemary white as a sheet. Seems they locked the door and pulled down the blinds, and I guess there was some heavy stuff going on when the conductor came for the tickets and knocked on the door. They thought it was us kidding them and wouldn't let him in at first. And when they did, he was plenty sore. He asked Hillis if this was his compartment and whether he and Rosemary were married, that they locked the door. And Hillis lost his temper trying to explain that there was nothing wrong. He said the conductor had insulted Rosemary and he wanted him to fight, but the conductor could have made trouble. And believe me, I had an awful time smoothing it over. With every detail imagined, with even envy for the pair's community of misfortune in the vestibule, Dick felt a change taking place within him. Only the image of a third person, even a vanished one, entering into his relation with Rosemary was needed to throw him off his balance and send him through the waves of pain, misery, desire, desperation. The vividly pictured hand on Rosemary's cheek, the quicker breath, the white excitement of the event viewed from outside, the inviolable secret warmth within. Do you mind if I pull down the curtain? Please do. It's too light in here. Collis Clay was now speaking frantically about fraternity politics at New Haven, in the same tone with the same emphasis. Dick had gathered that he was in love with Rosemary in some curious way Dick could not have understood. The affair with Hillis seemed to have made no emotional impression on Collis, save to give him the joyful conviction that Rosemary was human. Bones got a wonderful crowd, he said. We all did, as a matter of fact. New Haven's so big now, the sad thing is the men we have to leave out. Do you mind if I pull down the curtain? Please do. It's too light in here. Dick went over Paris to his bank, writing a check. He looked along the row of men at the desk, deciding to which one he would present it for an okay. As he wrote, he engrossed himself in the material act, examining meticulously the pen, writing laboriously upon the high glass top desk. Once he raised glazed eyes to look toward the mail department, then glazed his spirit again by concentration upon the objects he dealt with. Still, he failed to decide to whom the check should be presented, which man in the line would guess least of the unhappy predicament in which he found himself, and also which one would be the least likely to talk. There was Perrin, the suave New Yorker, who had asked him to luncheons at the American Club. There was Cassis, the Spaniard, with whom he usually discussed a mutual friend in spite of the fact that the friend had passed out of his life a dozen years before. There was Muchos, who always asked him whether he wanted to draw upon his wife's money or his own. As he entered the amount on the stub and drew 2 lines under it, he decided to go to Pierce, who was young and for whom he would have to put only on a small show. It was often easier to give a show than to watch one. He went to the mail desk first, as the woman who served him pushed up with her bosom a piece of paper that had nearly escaped the desk. He thought how differently women use their bodies from men. He took his letters aside to open. There was a bill for 17 psychiatric books from a German concern, a bill from Brentano's, a letter from Buffalo from his father, and a handwriting that year by year became more indecipherable. There was a card from Tommy Barbin, postmarked Fez and bearing a facious communication. There were letters from doctors in Zurich, both in German, a disputed bill from a plasterer in Cannes, a bill from a furniture maker, a letter from the publicist of a medical journal in Baltimore, miscellaneous announcements, and an invitation to a showing of pictures by an incipient artist. Also, there were 3 letters for Nicole, and a letter for Rosemary sent in his care. Do you mind if I pull down the curtain? He went towards Pierce, but he was engaged with a woman, and Dick saw that he would have to present his cheek to Cassius at the next desk, who was free. His check, not his cheek, my bad. How are you, Diver? Cassius was genial. He stood up, his mustache spreading with his smile. We were talking about Featherstone the other day, and I thought of you. He's out in California now. Dick widened his eyes and bent forward a little bit. In California? That's what I heard. Dick held the check poised. To focus the attention of Cassius upon it, he looked toward Pierce's desk, holding the latter for a moment in a friendly eye play conditioned by an old joke of 3 years before when Pierce had been involved with a Lithuanian countess. Pierce played up with a grin until Cassius had authorized the check and had no further recourse to detain Dick, whom he liked, then to stand up holding his pince-nez and repeat, "Yes, he's in California." Meanwhile, Dick had seen that Perrin, at the head of the line of the desk, was in conversation with the heavyweight champion of the world. From a side sweep of Perrin's eyes, Dick saw that he was considering calling him over and introducing him, but that he finally decided against it. Cutting across the social mood of Cassius was with the intensity he had accumulated at the glass desk, which is to say he looked hard at the check, studying it, and then fixed his eyes on grave problems beyond the first marble pillar to the right of the blanket's head and made a business of shifting the cane, hat, and letters he carried. He said goodbye and went out. He had long ago purchased the doorman. His taxi sprang to the curb. I want to go to the film's par excellence studio. It's on a little street in Passy. Go to the Met. I'll direct you from there. He was rendered so uncertain by the events of the last 48 hours that he was not even sure of what he wanted to do. He paid off the taxi at the Met and walked in the direction of the studio, crossing to the opposite side of the street before he came to the building. Dignified in his fine clothes, with their fine accessories, he is yet swayed and driven as an animal. Dignity could only come with an overthrowing of his past, of the effort of the last 6 years. He went briskly around the block with the fascistness of the Tarkington's adolescence, hurrying at the blind places lest he missed Rosemary's coming out of the studio. It was a melancholy neighborhood. Next door to the place he saw a sign, 1,000 chemises. The shirts filled the window, piled, cravated, stuffed, or draped with shoddy grace on the showcase floor. 1,000 chemises. Count them. On either side he read, Papeteer, Patissier, Solde, Reclame, and Constance Talmadge in Journal des Soleil. And farther away there were more somber announcements. Vedements ecclesiastiques, Declaration des Decease, and Pompous Fuenbres, life and death. He knew that what he was doing marked a turning point in his life. It was out of line with everything he preceded it, even out of line with what effect he might hope to produce upon Rosemary. Rosemary saw him always as a model of correctness. His presence walking around this block was an intrusion. But Dick's necessity of behaving as he did was a projection of some submerged reality. He was compelled to walk there, or stand there, his shirt sleeve fitting his wrist and his coat sleeve encasing the shirt sleeve like a sleeve valve. His collar molded plastically to his neck, his red hair cut exactly, his hand holding his small briefcase like a dandy, just as another man once found it necessary to stand in front of a church in Ferrara in sackcloth and ashes. Dick was paying some tribute to things unforgotten, unshriven, unexpurgated. That's the end of that chapter. So, if you couldn't tell, he's kind of stressing. Both of his wife and his mistress are upset. And now his mistress's ex is in the picture, not only talking about her, but talking about how she was with someone else. So, he's stressed. And also, Nicole noticed that he was gone for a night, and Literally, he's never been away from her the whole time they were together. So they're catching on. Okay. Chapter 21. After quarters of an hour standing around, he became suddenly involved in a human contact. It was just the sort of thing that was likely to happen to him when he was in the mood of not wanting to see anyone. So rigidly did he sometimes guard his exposed self-consciousness that frequently he defeated his own purposes. As an actor who underplays a part sets up a craning forward, a stimulated emotional attention in an audience, and seems to create in others an ability to bridge the gap he has left open. Similarly, we are seldom sorry for those who need to crave our pity. We reserve this for those who, by other means, make us exercise the abstract function of pity. So Dick might himself have analyzed the incident that ensued. As he paced the Rue des Saints-Inges, he was spoken to by a thin-faced American, perhaps 30, with an air of being scarred and a slight but sinister smile. As Dick gave him the light he requested, he placed him as one of the type of which he had been conscious since early youth, a type that loafed about tobacco stores with one elbow on the counter and watched, through heaven knew what small chink of the mind, the people who came in and out. Intimate to garages where he had vague business conducted in undertones, to barber shops, to the lobbies of theaters, in such places at any rate Dick placed him. Sometimes the face bobbed up in one of Tad's more savage cartoons. In boyhood, Dick had often thrown an uneasy glance at the dim borderland of crime on which he stood. "How do you like Paris, buddy?" Not waiting for an answer, the man tried to fit in his footsteps with Dick's. "Where are you from?" he asked encouragingly. "From Buffalo." "I'm from San Antone, but I've been over here since the war." "You in the army?" "I'll say I was. 84th Division. Ever heard of that outfit?" The man walked a little ahead of him and fixed him with eyes that were practically menacing. "Staying in Paris a while, buddy, or just passing through?" "Passing through. What hotel are you staying at?" Dick had begun laughing at himself. The party had the intention of rifling his room that night. His thoughts were read apparently without self-consciousness. "With a build like yours, you oughtn't to be afraid of me. There's a lot of bums around just laying for American tourists, but you needn't be afraid of me." Becoming bored, Dick stopped walking. "I just wondered why you've got so much time to waste." "I'm in business here in Paris." "In what line?" "Selling papers." The contrast between the formidable manner and the mild profession was absurd, but the man amended it with, "Don't worry, I made plenty money last year, 10 or 20 francs for a Sunny Times that cost 6. He produced a newspaper clipping from a rusty wallet and passed it over to one who had become a fellow stroller. The cartoon showed a stream of Americans pouring from the gangplank of a liner freighted with gold. 200,000, spending 10 million a summer. "What are you doing out here in Passy?" His companion looked around cautiously. "Movies," he said darkly. "They got an American studio over there, and they need guys who could speak English. I'm waiting for a break." Dick shook him off quickly and firmly. It had become apparent that Rosemary either had escaped on one of his early circuits of the block, or else had left before he came into the neighborhood. He went into the bistro on the corner, bought a lead disc and squeezed it in an alcove between the kitchen and the foul toilet he called the Roy George. He recognized Shane Stokes' tendencies in his respirations, but like everything, the symptoms served only to turn him in toward his emotions. He gave the number of the hotel, then stood holding the phone, staring into the cafe. After a long while, a strange little voice said hello. "This is Dick. I had to call you." A pause from her, then bravely, and in key with his emotions, "I'm glad you did. I came to meet you at your studio. I'm out in Passy across the way from it. I thought maybe we'd ride around through the boys." "Oh, I only stayed there a minute. I'm so sorry." A silence. "Rosemary?" Yes, Dick. Look, I'm in an extraordinary condition about you. When a child can disturb a middle-aged gent, things get difficult. You're not middle-aged, Dick. You're the youngest person in the world. Rosemary? Silence while he stared at a shelf that held the humbler poisons of France. Bottles of Atard, Rhone St. James, Marie Wizard, Punch Orangeade, Andrus Fernet Blanco, Cherry Rocher, and Armagnac. Are you alone? Do you mind if I pull down the curtain? Who do you think I'd be with? That's the state I'm in. I'd like to be with you now. Silence, then a sigh and an answer. I wish you were with me now. There was the hotel room where she lay behind a telephone number, and little gusts of music wailed around her. There was the remembered dust of powder over her tan. When he kissed her face, it was damp around the corners of her hair. There was a flash of white face under his own, the arc of a shoulder. It's impossible, he said to himself. In a minute he was out in the street, marching along toward the Moet, or away from it, his small briefcase still in his hand, his gold-headed stick held at a sword-like angle. Rosemary returned to her desk and finished a letter to her mother. I only saw him for a little while, but I thought he was wonderful looking. I fell in love with him. Of course, I do love Dick best, but you know what I mean. He really is going to direct the picture and is leaving immediately for Hollywood, and I think we ought to leave too. Collis Clay has been here. I like him all right, but have not seen much of him because of the Divers, who really are divine, about the nicest people I ever knew. I am feeling not very well today and am taking the medicine, though see no need for it. I'm not even going to try and tell you all that's happening until I see you. So when you get this letter, wire. Are you coming north, or shall I come south with the Divers? At 6, Dick called Nicole. Have you any special plans, he asked. Would you like to do something quiet, dinner at the hotel and then a play? Would you? I'll do whatever you want. I phoned Rosemary a while ago and she's having dinner in her room. I think this upset all of us, don't you? It didn't upset me, he objected. Darling, unless you're physically tired, let's do something. Otherwise we'll get south and spend a week wondering why we didn't see Boucher. It's better than brooding. This was a blunder, and Nicole took him up sharply. Brooding about what? About Maria Wallace. She agreed to go to the play. It was a tradition between them that they should never be too tired for anything, and they found it made the days better on the whole and put the evenings more in order. When, inevitably, their spirits flagged, they shifted the blame to the weariness and fatigue of others. Before they went out, as fine-looking a couple as they could to be found in Paris, they knocked softly at Rosemary's door. There was no answer. Judging that she was asleep, they walked into a warm, strident Paris night, snatching a vermouth and bitters in the shadows by Forks Bar. Oh, that's the end of this chapter. Well, so that's even more interesting. Rosemary already loves someone new. Crazy, right, Wednesday? So yeah, that's tea. She was writing a letter back to her mom, literally talking about how she loves someone else. Oh, but she loves Dick best and thinks that they should leave. Which, I mean, he kind of set himself up for that because he already told her that he didn't want to be serious, or he didn't want his wife to know that he loves his wife, and then, I don't know. But the tables are turning. All right, see you next time. Bye.